Welcome to our August 2022 meeting of the Atheist and Christian Book Club, where atheists and Christians respectfully discuss important books from both perspectives. Our August 2022 meeting, God, Black Holes, and the End of the Universe, is a chapter featured in The Story of the Cosmos, How the Heavens Declare the Glory of God. It is written by a former atheist, now an evangelical Christian, and astrophysicist, Dr. Sarah Salviander. The term black hole was first coined by the late physicist John Archibald Wheeler. Astronomers now tell us that a black hole is an inconceivable amount of mass, invisible to our most sophisticated technologies, believed to exist at the center of most galaxies. A black hole's attractive gravitational force is so incredibly powerful that not even light can escape it. It is said that Albert Einstein did not like the idea of black holes. Anything that falls into a black hole can never get back out and cannot send light or anything else out. And this was enough to convince Einstein and most other physicists of his day that black holes are outrageously bizarre objects which should not exist in the real universe. Somehow, the laws of physics must protect the universe from such beasts. That comes from Kip Thorne's book, Black Holes and Time Warps, on page 121. Despite the fact that we cannot directly see a black hole, there is nonetheless evidence for their existence. Black holes can be detected by what is going on around them. In 2019, astronomers published the first ever image of a close-up of what is going on around a black hole located at the center of the galaxy known as Messier 87. Here is a zoom in to the center of M87's black hole. In 2022, the Event Horizon Telescope, which is an array of 8 different radio telescopes located throughout the world, captured the first ever image of the event horizon around the black hole Sagittarius A at the center of our galaxy, the Milky Way. The Milky Way's black hole is 1,000 times smaller than the black hole in M87. But do black holes tell us something about God? From a biblical perspective, yes. Romans 1:20 says this, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse." We now know black holes to be immensely powerful, unseen, invisible. They are believed to govern the universe. They are deadly, as would be God's unmitigated holiness to us. Light and darkness are the same to God. God is light who makes darkness his hiding place, according to Psalm 18:11. But some object and say that black holes' inhospitable nature is evidence against God's existence. Why would God create so much matter and energy that is lethal to human life? So come and see the enigmatic weightiness of black holes on our August 2022 edition of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. Here is the co-founder and host of the Atheist and Christian Book Club, James Walker.
Well, welcome to the Atheist and Christian Book Club. My name is James Walker. I am president of Watchman Fellowship, an evangelical Christian apologetics ministry focusing primarily on interfaith evangelism and outreach. And I'm also co-founder of our Atheist and Christian Book Club. We've been going now for, It's our third year, fourth year?
Fifth year, in James, yeah.
Into the fifth year, that's right, into the fifth year now. Yeah. And what we are is a monthly gathering, get-together of both Christian believers as well as skeptics, unbelievers, atheists, and agnostics. And we respectfully discuss important books from both perspectives. Generally, we will alternate. We'll do a Christian book one month and an atheist book the next month. And we will try to read that information and then have substantive conversations about the content of that. And I will, our other co-founder, I'll introduce in just a moment. His name is Bill Cluck. He's a former Christian, now atheist. But our special guest today, we have a special guest author. Let me flip over here. Sarah Salviander. Dr. Salviander is a astrophysicist who studies extreme deep space phenomena, things like quasars and supermassive black holes, giant galaxies. Sarah was a researcher in the Department of Astronomy at the University of Texas at Austin for about 16 years, 9 of those years as a post-PhD research fellow. Then back in August of 2017, she retired from her position at UT to focus on ministry work, on Christian apologetics. Sarah was raised as an atheist in a secular country in Canada, but came to know God and Jesus Christ in large part through her scientific work. And in July 2005, halfway through her PhD studies, she was baptized as a Christian. Our book today is a chapter, her chapter, Sarah's chapter, co-author of The Story of the Cosmos, also co-authored by our own Daniel Ray, published by Harvest House. Chapter 6 is her story, and it's entitled God, Black Holes, and the End of the Universe, which we find out is not a time but a place. So she's graciously accepted our invitation to come in as author of that chapter and talk to us about that. Welcome to the Atheist and Christian Book Club, Sarah.
That was a great intro. Thank you.
Well, we are excited about this, and Daniel has known you well since working with you on that book as co-editor, along with Paul Gould. And man, it was a great chapter. I really enjoyed it. I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to hold my questions for you. What we're going to do is, if those of you who are in the club, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment or an insight, what I'm going to ask you to do is text, and we have two moderators, Daniel Ray and Brady Blevins, and they will queue up and invite you to come on and unmute your mic when it's time for you to ask a question. But being co-founders, Bill Cluck and I get first shot at asking some questions, so we're going to kind of set the stage on that. So Bill is my longtime friend. We just had a coffee and a long discussion just a couple of days ago. here in Arlington, Texas. Bill is, as I shared, a former Christian, now atheist, but Bill is still very interested in Christianity. He's not a Christian, but he still goes to church regularly, maybe more faithfully than I do sometimes. And he is also well-read. He loves to read Christian apologetics books and, of course, as well as atheistic apologetics books as well. So, Bill, I'm going to give you first shot at talking with Sarah, asking some questions. So welcome back to the club, Bill Cluck.
Hey, thanks, James. Hey, Sarah, I'm so glad you're here. I really enjoy your videos. And just to start off, I looked at Richard Carrier's video. Are you familiar with him?
I am.
He said that black holes are destructive, that they're not a good evidence. They're an evidence against God because they actually suck up everything in its path, and it's very destructive. But to your credit, you got to look at both sides. I looked at a documentary on how the universe works, and to my surprise, they said that black holes could be very beneficial, that they could help form galaxies. Now, keep in mind, I don't know what I'm talking about, so please explain why black holes are beneficial to galaxies.
Okay, that's a good question. There's a number of different ways. I'm actually surprised that somebody would say that that they're evidence against God because they're destructive. I mean, it's true. You don't want to get too close to one, and you would have to get extremely close to a black hole before you would have no hope of escaping its gravity. But what black holes do, and some of this is not stuff that we have pinned down definitively, but so my research focused on the tight correlation between the mass of a black hole and properties of its host galaxy. Like all these galaxies that we look at out there, there's overwhelmingly, most of them have evidence of a supermassive black hole in its core, including our own Milky Way galaxy. They seem to be a key part of galaxy formation. And because of this tight correlation, there's something that links the growth of these black holes with the growth of galaxies. And what we have seemed to have figured out is that black holes help to regulate the growth of a galaxy. So at a certain point, so what you've got when you've got a galaxy forming, you've got this giant cloud of very dense gas, and it starts to fragment and form stars, and it's collapsing, it's forming this galaxy, and you've got a lot of fuel there for that growth. Now, that gaseous material will also fuel the black hole growth. We don't know how these black holes formed in the first place. They seem to have formed primordially, meaning they just seem to have kind of just popped up as a part of the development of the universe. And so we find them, weighing maybe like hundreds of thousands of times the mass of the sun in the core of these galaxies. But this gas somehow gets funneled down to these black holes and starts feeding them, and they grow. And what happens is, when they reach this limit, and as this stuff spirals down onto the black hole, because of that extreme gravity, it becomes super sped up, almost to the speed of light. And so you've got, it kind of spirals down like a disc. Like if you've ever seen water, drain down your bathroom sink or something, it swirls down like that onto the black hole in an accretion disk. But that disk gets superheated because this stuff is just flying down there onto the black hole. It gets superheated and it starts to radiate. And so what it can do is it can actually start to sweep all of the gas, all of that star-forming material out of a galaxy and effectively shut down any further star formation, any further growth of these galaxies. So in a way, they could be preventing galaxies from getting so massive that they don't permit any life to form. They don't permit the kind of chemistry that we need in order to have life as we know it. So that's one way. Another is that you have a certain amount of entropy in the universe, so that, people kind of mistakenly say that's a measure of chaos, it's a measure of disorder. You've got and so what happens is you actually get black holes sequestering the vast majority of the entropy in the universe. Now, if all that entropy was unleashed in the universe, you wouldn't have things forming. You couldn't have star formation. You wouldn't have planets and galaxies forming. There would be too much unusable energy out there. And so I kind of just glibly call them, guardians of chaos, that because so much of that entropy, of that disorder in the universe is safely forever locked up in black holes. So that's two ways that we know of, that we're pretty sure of how black holes are beneficial to the universe.
Okay, that was the positive.
I had one
Like
quick
I said-
follow-up question first for just a second. One more quick one on that point. Sarah, do you know how many humans have been killed so far by black holes?
Well, to my knowledge, none. At least none from Earth.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
that was the
Sorry, go ahead,
positive
Bill. Had to ask that.
Thank you. Good question. Here's the thing. Okay, that's the positive. And like I said, I watched a secular program that agreed with you. Okay, but here's where I disagree with you. I watched your talk on, you said Moses wrote Genesis.
Mhm.
You can go to any university, including your University of Texas, and I assure you, they'll say that the P writer, the priestly writer in the 6th century, and J, the Yahwehist writer in the 10th century, wrote Genesis. This isn't even debated anymore in the university. Second, you said the order of the creation events is correct, that there's a 1 in 3 million chance that they're, just you'll like that, astronomical numbers. Here's the problem. Genesis got it all wrong. They couldn't even they have the earth created on the first day, of course, because they're earth-centered people, geocentric people. The sun created on the 4th day. So they couldn't even get that right. The major thing, and I used to you're familiar with Q. Ross, correct?
I sort of agree with Hugh. I disagree with him on some things.
Well, and interestingly enough, one of his staff, when I was a big Hugh Ross fan as a Christian, said, well, I agree with him on Monday, but not on Wednesday. Here's the crucial thing. And we had Danny Faulkner, who you might know, and he said the same thing. The plants come on day 3. This is way too early. They should be later. All science knows this. So when you have everything, plus, are you old Earth or young Earth?
I'm old Earth. You can't be an astrophysicist at UT and be young Earth.
Okay. Anyway, if you're old Earth, you have death and disease and dinosaurs. Proven 70 million years ago. You have thorns millions of years ago. It seems that death and destruction is the normal order of events. And in fact, and by the way, Ken Ham agrees with you. If you throw out Genesis 1 through 11, you throw out the foundation of the Bible, because all the doctrines of sin and atonement are in Genesis 1 through 11. So if you have death, disease, and destruction, you have a real problem before the creation of Adam and Eve. So my question to you is, with all the problems of Genesis 1 through 11, how in the world can you have a foundation for your faith?
So my first question is this just like a free-for-all, or are we supposed to be talking about the book?
Yeah, but I'm just saying this. I looked at your video just 30 minutes ago, and I'm saying, as a Christian, how do you reconcile the exegetical gymnastics that these old Earth people have to go through?
I don't think they're gymnastics. I disagree with everything that you said, other than I honestly don't care who wrote Genesis. The point is that it was written well before we had any modern scientific knowledge. But for all those other things, I completely disagree with all of that. I've done a very careful exegesis with Gerald Schroeder, who is, he's an Israeli Orthodox Jew. I don't know, some of you might have heard of him. He wrote a book called The Science of God. And he goes very carefully through Genesis. And he walks through it with the commentaries, these medieval commentaries, and carefully translates from the Hebrew and resolves all of those problems. Now, I could go through all of those things with you guys if you like, but my understanding is that this was more supposed to be about the book, for the book club. We could do something about Genesis some other time if you like, but I'll say that all of those are easily addressed So
Yes.
I don't know, those of you who are running the book club, what would
Yeah,
you prefer I do?
I think, Sarah, we can stick to the book, and we can
Okay.
have you back and do Genesis, but you are free to respond. But yes, topically, we should stay on track with what we brought you on
Yeah,
for.
it's your show, Sarah. Whatever you want to talk about, go ahead.
Yeah, because this could completely hijack the discussion.
Oh, go
So
ahead.
I think it's better to stick to this. But what you could do, if you go to my website, like just go to Twitter, find me on Twitter, go to my pinned tweet, and I've got links to this. I've got a whole big, long, involved slideshow that goes step by step through all of this stuff, and it addresses everything that you've asked.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good too. She's got videos and everything. So yeah, that would be great if you're interested in following up with what Bill said. Sarah's got good information on Genesis. You just did not a couple of months ago, you just did a presentation for a chapter. Was it Reasonable Faith, the Reasons to Believe, or Ratio Christi on your Genesis talk, I think, right, Sarah?
Yeah, I do so many things.
You do. You do. James, did you have?
Yeah. I had a question. It was a number of questions. I do want to give time, and again, remind if you have a question as well for Sarah, if you'll text that right now to us. So you find the text button on that, and then Daniel and Brady will make sure you get queued up and all on that. But the first part, the initial chapter, initial part of the chapter, you talked about the challenge on accepting black holes from the scientific community, because it was so non-intuitive. It was the opposite of what you would expect to find. It seemed to break the laws of physics. You talked about Eddington and Chandra, and the back and forth there of some of the sharpest minds in the field not being able to even consider the possibility, because it just went against everything they seem to hold to and believe is true. And you said that it really, from your opinion, boiled down to 4 different human characteristics that makes it sometimes difficult for even the most brilliant minds and the sharpest investigators to be able to accept a paradigm shift like black holes. Can you go over and kind of talk a little bit about those 4 human characteristics that make it difficult for us to fathom these things?
Okay, the 4 limitations, and I'm struggling to remember which one. So there's limited perspective, which shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, we have a lifespan of roughly 80 years. We're stuck on one tiny little chunk of rock in a vast cosmos. We can only see visible wavelengths. I mean, it's just in every possible way, we're limited in what we can perceive. There's pride, which is kind of a big one. Like, how could I, this idea, like, how could I possibly be wrong? There is, it's been a while since I looked at this chapter.
I have them, Sarah, if you want.
Okay, let me see if I've got another one. There's kind of like this intellectual inertia. It's like, well, this is what I've always believed. It's kind of hard to change your mind. And then there's the emotional aspect of it. Did I get them right?
That's all. You got them.
Yeah. Misleading emotions, and you'd be surprised how often, especially the emotional thing, can come into play with professional scientists, people who are brilliant, people who are well-versed in the scientific method, and who are, they're intellectually honest people, but they just sometimes do get overwhelmed emotionally because an idea to them might just be philosophically so weird or repulsive. And I think about, I think his name was John Maddox, who was the editor either of Science magazine or Nature magazine back in the 80s. He was a very well-known biologist. And boy, did he rail against the Big Bang. He just hated it. And same with Jeffrey Burbidge, who was a famous astrophysicist who I knew, hated it. And, they kind of fought against it their whole lives, just because philosophically they said they found it objectionable. But as we know, that's not a good basis for dismissing something. It has to be based on evidence and reason. So it's surprising to me, but we're all subject to these things. Nobody can completely overcome all of these things. Some people can kind of temporarily overcome, like there are some heroes in the chapter that I wrote that, were able to kind of push past the weirdness of black holes in order to accept the evidence, because frankly, they are extremely strange objects, and you have to kind of.
We think about science as a whole, and scientists, we think about them being dispassionate and looking just at the evidence. And one of the strengths of science is its ability to change and have paradigm shifts and things. And so that's, we always look at that as a strength. But when you really think about it, especially the big paradigm shifts, a lot of times scientists don't go into that happily looking for this new way of thinking. They are dragged kicking and screaming by the data and by the evidence, but often. It's not often something that they are happy to and with open arms welcome these paradigm shifts.
Yeah, but sometimes they are. Sometimes they'll be like, I don't like it, but I'll go with it. And sometimes people get really excited about paradigm shifts. So it's a mixed bag. But yeah, you have to factor in the humanity of scientists who are doing the science, because just because you have a degree or you put a lab coat on doesn't mean that you lose your human nature. It's just something that the scientific method is supposed to, kind of properly channel, so that, people can be a little more objective, and you can just try to get at the truth despite these limitations.
Yeah, one of the many odd things about quasars and black holes that, first of all, I enjoyed the way that you explained it in layman's terms. I felt like I understood what you were saying. It was still hard to imagine something that big and that powerful. But you talked about, I think it was Oppenheimer, who was the kind of one of the fathers of the atomic bomb, and I think it was him who really struggled. One of the things that made it hard for him to embrace this concept was that depending on the perspective, you would see something totally different if you were able to actually observe a black hole. Of course, that's one of the problems; they're invisible, which makes them also harder to believe in. But if you, I think it was the math that would indicate that if you were a distant observer, you would see one thing, but then if you were actually right by or close to the event horizon, you would see something totally different. And that too seems so counterintuitive. It's like, well, this can't be true. It just seems like cannot be true. But you mentioned, without giving the example, and maybe it's too detailed, and if so, we can skip to something else. But you did talk about that there were some analogies or some illustrations that would help us to understand how a distant observer would see it differently.
I'm checking to see if I have the book on my shelf that's got the illustration, because the problem is it's almost impossible to describe in layman's terms what this resolution is.
Is this it, Sarah?
Pictures.
Is that the
so
book?
It's that book, and I got it somewhere in here. Let me just look on my shelf. Sorry.
If you tell me the page,
I can flip it open. Okay, so I'm not seeing it in here. It's got to be in a different room. Okay, so since you've got it, Dan, it's a picture with the ants, if you can find that.
I know exactly the picture you're looking for.
It's such a nifty illustration of this. So yeah, that was the problem, is that depending on your frame of reference, you would see two completely different things as the stars collapsing, because this was the whole thing that kicked off the black hole crisis. Is you've got what happens when a star collapses? Because we know that stars, the reason they're not constantly collapsing is because they've got outward pressure that's balancing the inward crush of gravity. That outward pressure is generated by the fusion that's going on in the core of a star, produces radiation, energy, and it pushes out. But what happens when that stops? The star should just collapse, right? But the problem is that they found these things called white dwarfs that have pretty much almost all of the mass of, say, like a sun-like star, compressed down to about the size of the Earth, but it didn't collapse infinitely. What's supporting it against gravity when it's got nothing to push back on? And so this introduced the white dwarf crisis. They figured out it was electron pressure that was pushing against it. But then if you overcome that, it crushes down to a neutron star. And again, it's neutron, this quantum pressure that prevents it from completely collapsing. But then you can overcome that. And this is when you get this infinite collapse down to a black hole. So they're trying to figure out mathematically, okay, what does that look like when you get that collapse? And the weirdo thing is, and this was a huge mathematical problem that Oppenheimer and one of his graduate students just worked through. And in a time before supercomputers, this was an incredible feat because the mathematics were just ridiculous for this. And partly was just grinding through it. And then partly was also, as I mentioned in this chapter, that Oppenheimer had this eerie ability to kind of sense which details could be ignored to simplify the math. And it turned out later when they did this through a supercomputer, he was absolutely right in which details he ignored. But anyway, so they were pretty confident that the math was correct. They went through this and he looked at it and said, well, if I was on the black hole's event horizon when this is happening, I would see one thing. If I was somewhere far away, I would see something different. And they just couldn't reconcile. It's like, how is that possible? Okay, so Dan's got a picture. And so with this resolution, which is a very mathematical resolution, but Kip Thorne, who's a wonderful author, and he's got this illustration here. You try to maximize it if you can. And so basically the idea is he's got this troop of ants that's traveling along this ground, and the ground is kind of deformable. And so what's happening is as the ants are moving along and they're going through this one spot, the ground begins to kind of deform due to their weight. And they've got one ant who's firing these spheres out of this mechanism, and he fires them off every second. And each sphere is numbered. So like sphere 1, sphere 2, every second you're getting another one. But as more and more ants are kind of just staying there and this ground is collapsing under them, you can see that the ground is deforming. So those spheres actually have a longer distance to travel as they get fired out of that hole. So there's the ant inside of the hole, which would be like an observer near the black hole. He's still firing off these spheres once every second. But the ant who's receiving them is getting them at a longer and longer duration, okay, until finally there's so many ants in there that the hole that they've kind of, the deformation that their weight has created, it's just, this hole sort of collapsed on itself and then they disappear. Now, what this is supposed to show is the ants that are in that deformed area that kind of just closes up on itself, that would be an observer close to the black hole. And because what you would see as you're an observer kind of riding down with the collapse into the black hole is that the collapse accelerates, okay? And, you're still perceiving time normally, but somebody far away would see the collapse just kind of slow down and then just freeze. And then it'd be as though time stopped. And so he explains it visually with those ants. The mathematical solution, is really technical, but once that was put on, I can't remember the fellow who did that, David somebody, brilliant guy who had this insight, but that kind of resolved it. And then people were like, oh, okay. But I make a point about faith here that even brilliant scientists and somebody like Oppenheimer, right, who's gone through the math of all this, but the idea was so weird that he didn't even trust his own math that's right in front of him. I mean, you can't get more rational than an equation, right? And even then, he just couldn't push past that thing that he had about how could you possibly have two different observers seeing two completely different things. And so what I say is, he lacked faith. He lacked faith in the mathematics, in the methods of science, because it was just too weird for him. And it's something also that one of his friends, who is another Nobel laureate physicist, and I can't remember his name, I mentioned this in the chapter, and others have said that, he lacked faith in the hard, crude methods of science. And also because he was getting into Eastern mysticism at that time, he'd become very interested in Hinduism and things like that, that for him, there was sort of this shroud of knowledge, this veil that kind of fell over, a certain point where it's like you just can't know what's going on beyond a certain point. It's like this sort of mystical view of reality that honestly kind of altered his thinking, so that he couldn't cope with this, and he just like, okay, this is weird, I'm out. And then it was left up to John Wheeler, who is a really interesting guy in physics, to kind of take up the mantle and keep going. Because initially he found it too weird too. But then when they had this resolution with the different frames of reference, then Wheeler was like, aha! And then he took it all the way to the finish line.
Sarah, I know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it for everybody else because we've talked about this enough. Oppenheimer, like you said, you just described, kind of stopped at a boundary line that's just too bizarre. He was not you talk in the book about his worldview and the difference between the worldview, the sort of the outlook of John Archibald Wheeler, who was courageous enough to explore the weirdness. And it was Wheeler. Was it Wheeler that coined black hole? It was Wheeler that coined black hole. Yes. It was Fritz Zwicky that said it was dark matter. I get those confused. Yeah. But I wanted to ask a question because I know Christians do this. I've done it, where we look at something in secular cosmology and we go, that's just so bizarre. It's stupid, right? The multiverse, you name it. If a physicist comes out with a wacky idea, we're all laughing at it or something. But so my question is, I mean, I kind of already know what you might say, but my question is, where's the line of weirdness? Like, what is acceptable to pursue despite its strange and uniqueness? What do you think is the boundary line? I mean, it seems like somebody would be reasonable to presume that multiverses are ridiculous and I'm not going to pursue it. Or, but dark matter is more closer to what I'm thinking of. It seems really weird, but people are really actively engaged in pursuing this. So what do you think is the line for something being too strange? How would we discern whether or not to pursue something? And I think this touches about the perspective of humility that you write about, that we shouldn't just initially laugh at something. Every response should at least have some thoughtful merit to it. So where's the line for weirdness for you? Where do we not pursue something?
Okay, that's an interesting question. The line of weirdness. So for me, philosophically, it's hard to tell because I don't come up against a lot of stuff that I just say, oh, that's too weird for me. Where I have the line is it testable? Can we look for evidence to support or falsify this? And so with black hole, and that kind of touches on the black hole thing a little bit, because at the time that they're going through all the mathematics of this, they are saying, well, technically this is testable because we're talking about stuff that's in this universe, right? But black holes are so small and they're black and space is black and they don't supposedly radiate. They had no hope of ever finding these things. So that might have been part of the line of weirdness for some of these people, because they thought this is not really going to, in practical terms, isn't going to be testable. For me, the line of weirdness really kind of goes along like, can we physically test this idea? I mean, in terms of math and philosophy, I love things like string theory. I love things like the multiverse. They're really fun to explore. But if they're not testable, then for me, that line, I would say it's not so much a line of weirdness, but a line of between speculation and science.
Okay. So we can call it weird and we can be as weird as we want to, but to call it science, you're saying it's got to have that empirical testable aspect to it. Yeah, at least physical science.
Yes, and there's a little bit of a debate going on right now in physics over whether empiricism, the empirical aspect of it should be king. Obviously I think that. A lot of people think that's been the tradition for the hundreds of years that we've had modern science. But there are people, and not surprisingly, people who are proponents of the multiverse theory who are saying, maybe we don't need to have empiricism playing such an important role in science. And I think that's foolishness. I think that's you can say this is science flavored or it's on the periphery of science. And as scientists, we should be discussing these things, which I agree with, but you can't call it science if it's not testable. So that would be my line of weirdness, probably.
Gotcha. So as we're developing, as the history, because your presentation, I know we filmed this a couple of years ago, but in the book and the presentation, you did a great job of outlining the history of how this really was weird. And at some point, it was that novel genius, I think it was John Archibald Wheeler, who said, no, let's go forward with this, because it was Chandrasekhar, who was a graduate student of Eddington, thank you. And Eddington thought, well, he was repulsed by the beginning of the universe, and Eddington had a genius under his tutelage who was on the path to making this discovery. And quite frankly, Eddington and Chandrasekhar could have pioneered the discovery of the black hole, but they kind of.
Oh my goodness, that is such a tragic story. I mean, not
it is
for the lost opportunity there, but that, and thankfully Chandrasekhar, he became very discouraged by this and ended up leaving that, part of astrophysics to pursue completely different topics. But you had this young, brilliant guy coming in, and there is a little bit of this old school thing where, you have young students coming in and the professors are kind of like, you're a little bit of a peon, you're a little bit of an insect. And I can tell you, I had firsthand experience with this. So some of you may recognize the name of Steven Weinberg, who was a Nobel laureate in my department at UT. And I took a cosmology class from him. I had some interactions with him. Now, as a graduate student, I was just kind of a bug as far as he was concerned. He didn't know my name. He didn't know anything about me. And as soon as I got my PhD and I was introduced to him as Dr. Salviander, he had a big smile on his face. He put his hand out, how are you? And it's like suddenly I had reached, I became a human being in his estimation. And, and I wasn't offended by this at all. It was just such an old school thing that a lot of professors, a lot of scientists are like that. As a grad student, you're kind of just hard labor. That's what you do. And you need to earn your humanity by getting your doctorate. And so I think there was a bit of that going on with Eddington and Chandrasekhar. But also Eddington was a little full of himself. There was some pride there because he was the astrophysicist of the time. I mean, like, he was the rock star. He was the astronomer royal. Like, you couldn't get to a more higher credential level than Eddington was. And so he hated this idea of this quantum pressure that pushed back against a star collapse. He's like, he just, for some reason, hated it. It bothered him because at the time, quantum physics was very new. It was very weird. A lot of people didn't like it. He wasn't on board with it. And because of this, because of his emotional reaction to it, his pride, because of his status, he just crushed this whole thing, and he kind of squashed Chandrasekhar. And there were even people like Wolfgang Pauli and other people of stature who kind of privately told Chandra, look, we agree with you, but they weren't willing to publicly go against Eddington. And so, it's really tragic because, like you said, those two could have taken it, to the end zone, but they didn't, because of his limitations.
Right. And I think it's interesting too, if you just read the history of Eddington and his life. I mean, like you said, he was a rock star. He's like the Neil deGrasse Tyson of the early 20th century. And I wonder,
even far more than that, because
right.
And not to denigrate Neil, I actually am very fond of him, but he's more of a publicizer of science, whereas Eddington, hardcore scientist, like in the academy. But also having that rock star status.
But it goes back to one of the aspects that you're talking about in terms of humility and pride. We all have this special struggle. It's not unique to any of us. We all have this concept. Well, I'm in a particular position, and because of my position, I have to defend something. And I wonder how much of his prestige prevented him from being a little too esoteric in his research. We can always speculate about that, but
preventing his colleagues from pushing against him, and this is where you get a lot of good science coming out of crises like this, and this interplay and this pushing back and forth between scientists who disagree with each other in good faith. And I think his status kind of intimidated even other great scientists into not pushing back against him as much as they should have. And I've seen this when I would go to these meetings, with Weinberg, or we would have other Nobel laureates there sometimes. And these other scientists who are, to me, very respectable and had, great publication records and the whole thing, they would be intimidated by him and wouldn't push back a lot against some of the things that he would say. And it's just a natural human thing.
We have several questions lined up, Sarah. And I do want to remind everybody, we want to stay on topic with the chapter or the video in relation to this, if you can. And I'll let Sarah, you can answer as you see fit. But Brady, do you want to start going through our queue? Who's up? I think Peter's up first. Peter has a question. Peter was...
Yeah, we could do Peter. I also have Ken too. Peter might have snuck in, but I know we had Ken early on.
Yeah, Peter tapped me as soon as we started.
Okay.
So
gotcha.
So Peter, and then Ken, you can ask your questions. So Peter, go ahead.
Dr. Sarah, I communicated to Daniel that I greatly appreciated him putting the video up, shall we say, of the chapter. I have ADHD from the back in the 60s before they called it that. I'm an audio visual learner, not a text learner. And so going on through that, if I understood some of the mystery of black hole and otherwise literally weren't settled until they developed the mapping of the radiation across the cosmos, and that one of the conclusions that led to is a definitive start to the universe, if I'm understanding what I was hearing you say. And that firmness, that definitiveness is very important to me, because in other places that I saw you speak, and I'll be careful because I don't want to go too far, but the fine-tuning argument is built off 1517 concrete. This is this, and this is this, and it can't be something else, and therefore it leads to here. And so here's the gist of my question. There was one more video that popped up, which was a presentation you made about 4 weeks ago in Austin, and you were talking about quintillionness of a calculation or odds of something being true or not. And I don't want you to speak beyond, because I realize there's a publishing cycle in of that. But when we get to that material, am I going to be able to dig out the kind of things that I would find in fine tuning of the science bedrock data of what it seems like I'm hearing where you're going?
Are you talking about my future book that I'm going to be publishing about this stuff?
The future book that we won't talk about because but I'm interested in because that's where I'm just a hard cider drinking disciple. I'm not a scientist or otherwise, but I do like to have, here's the concrete pieces, and this is where it leads to. And that's kind of what I was hearing you outline. And so I'll be able to go, the part of the unfolding of that is you're going to be unfolding the concrete pieces that lead to this amazing calculation that's just so that's what I'm asking. I'm just anticipating getting, I don't know if it's new, I don't know, where all that's going, but
So, Peter, are you asking about the fine tuning argument, which
no,
us atheists have a problem with, actually?
no.
What's the question?
She is about to publish something that apparently is even beyond that and that calculation.
I know exactly what you're asking, Peter, and you're my kind of person. I'm exactly like you. I've got to have the concrete steps. I've got to have the evidence. I've got to have it all laid out for me. And so, yes, I will be putting that in my book. And in fact, I've got 2 appendices to the book. My editor convinced me that, because I wanted to include all of the really gnarly details and the mathematics in the body of the book. And he said, no way, most people are going to want you just to keep moving. I said, this has got to be in the book. He said, let's put it in the appendix. So I'm going to have at least 2 appendices where I walk through every detail of this stuff. So you're going to get that. And then I also appreciate what you said about the audio-visual thing, because people have different modes of learning. And I'm going to make sure that we have videos for the key chapters in that book. So for people like you who prefer and have a better time learning that way, then I'll have that for you guys.
So is your book on fine tuning?
No.
Okay.
All right.
I didn't mean to confuse the subject.
No, I knew what you're asking. Yeah. It like you're saying you were drawing on fine tuning is sort of an analogy to what I'm talking about.
By the way, go ahead. Is fine tuning a good argument for the existence of God?
Yeah, I think it is. It's not. Why? It's not like a crushing, definitive argument, but it's good.
Well, Sean Carroll, when me and James were in New Mexico, we played. Sean Carroll is an atheist, hardcore. He admitted to some of these gravitational constants, the density of matter, the neutron, protein, all these incredible constants. He admitted to. It's in his book, Why God is Not a Good Answer. It's just amazing. So why shouldn't me as an atheist, why shouldn't I believe in this fine tuning?
Actually, you should, Bill.
I don't know if everybody else experienced that, but it just froze for a few seconds.
Why shouldn't I believe in why should I find the fine tuning arguments, which are incredibly precise, the universe seems to be incredibly fine tuned for life. Why shouldn't I believe that is a good evidence for God?
Why should you or should not?
Good. Why should I believe that?
Well, so are you familiar with William Lane Craig?
Yes.
Okay, so he has this deductive logic sort of approach to things like this, which is, now you've got something like incredible fine tuning. What are the possible explanations for this? It's either by chance, it's either by necessity, or it's by design. And so what you can do is you can start to go through those and you can rule out which ones are just extremely unlikely or impossible. And whatever, in the Sherlock Holmesian sort of thing, whatever you're left with, however weird it might be, then you've got to accept that that's the truth. And so Bill goes through this whole thing and says, well, it's not by necessity. And any physicist will tell you that there's no reason that these quantities, these finely tuned properties have to be the way that they are. There's no physical thing that demands that. The chance part of it, just again, the odds against this are just very, very remote. And so he says this leaves design as the most probable explanation for why we have this incredible fine tuning. Now, I would like to recommend, now that's for the logic part of it. For all of the other details of it, I want to recommend my colleague, Luke Barnes, who's an incredible guy. He's written at least 2 books, really good books, with a colleague of his, Lewis, I'm trying to remember what that's his name, Grant Lewis, who's an atheist. And so it's really cool that they write these books together and they'll present all the kind of the evidence and the scientific aspect of it. And then at the end of the book, they talk about why they have their own perspectives on what it means philosophically. But anyway, if you go to Luke Barnes's website, he's got several papers, both scholarly level and more kind of informed layperson level discussions about fine tuning, what it means. And he responds to Sean Carroll in detail. And he responds especially to, there was a famous debate between William Lane Craig and Sean Carroll. And he goes kind of point by point through all of these things that they talk about. And then he explains from an astrophysics point of view and from a Bayesian statistics point of view what it all means. So I highly recommend that.
That's great. And I'll look into it. But in Romans 1, it says atheists are suppressing the truth. Are we just suppressing the truth?
By, like, what do you mean?
Well, in Romans, it says it's clear. And now with the fine tuning constants, we have even more evidence that God's, monkeyed or designed the universe. So are we as atheists suppressing the truth because of our unrighteousness?
Can somebody read to me what the verse says?
Oh, James gives talks on it, so he knows it by heart.
Okay.
I'll read.
Professing ourselves wise, we became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man and birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Just again, the idea of suppressing the truth in unrighteousness is what the text says.
The first part of that is because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world. And this is what Sarah's chapter gets into.
Yeah,
his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. That's Romans 1:19 and 20.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm a former atheist, like big time. I was an anti-theist. Man, I hated Christianity. I was raised that way. I was raised atheist. So, I'm not speaking acrimoniously about this, and I'm not speaking without, experience. Now, I can't speak for all atheists. I don't know. What I can say is I do know for a fact, and I have spoken with some people who say that they deliberately hold things back. I had this really weird conversation with a biology grad student back when I was a grad student. And we were just, because I'm not really fired up about evolution either way. I find it all very interesting. And I was talking to him, and we were talking about Evo Devo, which is a really interesting kind of new-ish subfield in biology. And I encourage you to look it up. There's a book by a different Sean Carroll, Sean B. Carroll, called Endless Forms Most Beautiful. It's about the science of Evo Devo that is just incredible. And so I was talking to this graduate student about this, and I said, this is really incredible. And I said, and it kind of supports something like there was some biblical aspect of it that I thought that it was kind of supportive of that. And he said, yeah, it is. And I said, well, why aren't you guys talking about this more? And he said, because I don't want to hand Christians a victory. And I thought, well, that's a really unscientific thing to say. And so I was a little disturbed by that. So I think there are some out there who hold things back and try to obfuscate because maybe they think it's a little too supportive of the Christian worldview and it bothers them. I'm not going to accuse anyone specifically because I don't know. I just don't know. I think biblically, often what it's talking about is just like when I was an atheist, and I remember this, it was like there was sort of a veil over my eyes, and it was preventing me from seeing these things in a way. And I don't know whether that just because I didn't want Christianity to be true. And so I feel like it wasn't so much that I was going about deliberately trying to confuse people and hold back evidence and things like that. It's just that I honestly couldn't see it, and I think
Sarah, here's what's disturbing to me is you became a Christian by reading, of all people, The Case for Christianity, okay, by a news editor. What's his name?
Lee Strobel.
Lee Strobel. The way you find the truth of Christianity is look at our last video. Dale Allison is the guy to go to. He's a real scholar from a real university, Princeton University. Now, speaking of people suppressing the truth, Ken Daniels was a Christian missionary and became an atheist. So Ken, What's your question?
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused.
Ken has a question.
Oh, somebody else did?
Okay, yeah. So I'm Ken Daniels, the one he just
Ken,
mentioned.
hi.
And I don't necessarily characterize myself as an atheist, more of an agnostic. I was, like as you mentioned, a Wycliffe Bible translator in Africa for some time before I started having doubts about, especially about the Bible. That's what kind of led me away, not science or anything like that, initially at least. And so I became more of a theist, maybe a liberal Christian to start with, and then kind of went into deism, and then more agnosticism, which is where I've been for the last 22 years, something like that. But anyway, I want to ask a clarifying question and also present a little bit of a critique. So it's a two-parter. But first of all, I want to say I watched your video last evening, the one that Daniel Ray put out on the web, and I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and it was very clear. It was very engaging. Didn't find myself disagreeing with a whole lot there.
I got to give props to Dan for that. I don't think I had anything to do with that other than just writing the chapter.
Well, I mean, you wrote the chapter, I read that as well, and then you did the presentation, and you put together the slideshows and everything to go along with it. So it was a really good presentation, I thought. But one of the things that I liked was that illustration that you were just talking about with the ants, because it helped me understand a little bit about that, the light and how it kind of slows down or around the edges of the black hole. But my question is a very technical question on that one is, like, if are those photons around the edge or very close to it, are they just kind of locked in and standing still? And if that's the case, how is my eye seeing any light at all? Because the photons have to hit my eyes, right, in order for me to see light. So it's a very, very tiny little question, but I had a question about that.
Let me just make sure I understand what you're asking. So analogously, what they're talking about is that, light photons that would get extremely close to the black hole. Mm-hmm. And so what aspect of it is it that you're wanting clarification on?
So if I'm looking at the black hole from a distance, I'm being told that it's frozen, right? That light is frozen, or what exactly is frozen?
If you could, so this is in principle, because you can't see an invisible thing that's doing anything, right? So somehow, if you could track mathematically, this is what they came to mathematically. If you could track the collapse of the black hole, you would see from a distance slow down its collapse until it kind of just appeared to freeze at a certain point. So another way you could think about this is if you could, some poor astronaut who was dumb enough to get out of his spaceship and just get too close to the black hole, you'd see him falling in and getting spaghettified as going in. But at a certain point, you see him slow down as he gets there and then just appear to be forever hovering above the event horizon, when in his frame of reference, he's gone in and he's toast, right? He's been shredded. So now the question is how...
But if I'm seeing that, I don't know if I am or am not seeing that person going in. But if I am seeing it, how is the light getting to me if it's frozen there? How are those photons? So I have to be seeing something. I have to be seeing photons, right? Or they have to be reaching my eyes.
So those photons. Now, what happens is that the photons themselves don't, like, you don't have a photon. This is kind of counterintuitive. Actually crossing the event horizon and going into the black hole. What happens is that the photon loses energy. It gets close to this black hole, and it's like it's trying to climb out of that gravity well, and it can't, and it's lost all of its energy, and so it gets redshifted. It's because it's losing energy, and energy is proportional to the frequency and wavelength. Its wavelength gets stretched out to the point that it goes to pretty much invisible way, like it gets stretched out to microwave, to radio, and then at that point it just, you wouldn't be able to see it anymore.
Okay.
So
yeah, that helps clarify it. I thought I understood that it was visible, but now I'm hearing you're saying that it's not really visible. It's just kind of
by instrumentation. We can see it through radio wavelengths. Sarah, I have, if you want to. Ken, did you have another question?
Yeah, that was just my precursor. Yeah, that was
okay.
Just my little clarifying. So the meat of what I wanted to say was that I thought it was a little bit selective and maybe unfair to call out Oppenheimer. I don't share his mystical worldview at all, but I like to think that, well, like if I had the evidence he had, I would have accepted the evidence. But I also put myself in the place of, let's say, an antebellum slaveholder in the South, right? Like if I were in the 1840s and I had slaves and I was white and I grew up in that, I probably would have accepted that system as it was at the time, even though today I'd like to think I wouldn't have done that, right? So it's easy from the luxury of having the benefit of all the evidence that's come through since the time of Oppenheimer. Even Wheeler had access to more, like you said, he had more computational power at his disposal. And then so it's a little bit, and he didn't even accept it at first. It was just some evidence, some extra evidence that kind of tipped things in his favor. So I think it's a little bit maybe unfair to call him out on that, and especially then when you went on to say that to praise who is it, Kepler for advocating that you got to be able to test things, you got to have empirical evidence before you come to some conclusion about something. And so Oppenheimer didn't really have the benefit of all that, at least the way I understood it being presented. And so I just thought it was a little bit unfair to call him out that way. And especially I want to add one more thing to that to kind of drive that home is that that, you know, as a non-believer, I'm embarrassed by people who say who believe in mythicism, Jesus mythicism, who believe that Jesus never existed, for example. So I'm embarrassed by that. I try to call that out when I can, but I just don't see, other than maybe Hugh Ross, I don't see people calling out, for example, young Earth creationism, which is, you know, absurd. And why call out Oppenheimer and not young Earth creationists who are afflicted by the same four impediments to seeing the truth about the old Earth and the old universe, and plus one more, their adherence to a faithful or a face value reading of the Bible that gets in their way of seeing the truth about that. So why be selective about Oppenheimer's Eastern mysticism and not selective about, and not highlight, not stand up with others who are discrediting or who are calling out such an absurd thing as a young Earth?
Okay, fair points. So I would put it this way, yeah, and it's I like the example that you use. So like a fish only knows the water that it's swimming in, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, from that perspective. Now did you read my chapter?
I did a while ago. I didn't read it most recently. I watched the 1 hour video, the 1 hour quarter video. So, but yeah, I had read your chapter a while back. Mm-hmm.
My third in which I criticize Oppenheimer, it's not just Oppenheimer, it's also Eddington. Not so much saying, you know, boy, what a maroon, you know, mm-hmm. Not like that at all. I mean, he was brilliant. He definitely advanced the field of physics, and especially black hole physics. He definitely played a very important role. And you're right that there's, first of all, this was the milieu that they were in. You know, this was the philosophy, the culture. And so you can't fault them for not just immediately jumping on board. Like, how many weird things are there maybe in physics now that people are just like, you know,
like string theory or multiverse,
until we have evidence.
Like
and I even just said that unless there's evidence, I'm not going to believe. Mm-hmm. So more, it's like lamenting the lost opportunity that it's like, I don't look at Oppenheimer as being like, you know, what a dope. He's a great physicist. I look at more as just like, gosh, if he would have just believed the math and just pushed ahead, he would have done something just amazing, which is just that he would have been the guy who would have figured out black holes. And so Eddington, I'm going to be a little more critical of, because he was a little bit of a jerk. And, you know, you had that pride thing there. And because of his status, people didn't feel like they could criticize him. With Oppenheimer, it was more like, I get it, but it was just like, oh gosh, you know, if he would have just had a little more faith in the math and kept going, you know, I think he would have been the one to get it over the finish line. So, you know, I hope I didn't come across as too harsh against Oppenheimer in my book, because I certainly didn't feel that way. It was just more like lamenting a lost opportunity. And then you're right, of course, that Wheeler had the benefit of having that mathematical insight. I wish I could remember that guy's name, the physicist who figured that out. And then also when they had the supercomputers, and this is something that came out of World War II, that they had these advances in supercomputers that were able to grind through the calculations and say, hey, yeah, Oppenheimer actually was completely right. Because prior to that, legitimately people could have said, well, what if he, approximated things incorrectly? What if he, the details that he ignored, what if they were important? So I think you have a fair point, but I hope I didn't come across as too critical of Oppenheimer, because really for me, it was just more about a missed opportunity. Now, about the young earth thing, I share your sentiments on that. And for me as a believer, I kind of walk this fine line, because I think we need to have that unity in the body of Christ and not be attacking each other, but at the same time, definitely wanting to criticize what I consider to be a very flawed view of the sciences, of the universe. And while I respect that they're really trying to hold on to their faith, I think it's a misguided thing that they're doing. And as I go forward in my ministry and with my book, I am actually going to be very critical of them, but in as gentle a way as I can be. But yeah, absolutely, we do need to be calling that out.
Well, Sarah, that is extremely important, because this isn't any small thing. 40% of the population believe the universe is 6,000 years old. This is a huge, as you know, mistake. So tell us why the universe isn't 6,000 years old.
Because the physical evidence doesn't say that. The physical evidence very clearly. Now, for me, it's not about one piece of evidence. It's about multiple independent lines of evidence all converging on the same conclusion. And is just, at this point, there's no reason for me to believe scientifically that the universe is anything other than, billions of years old.
Well, thank you. And see, Russell Humphreys wrote a book, Starlight in Time, where you're familiar where the time dilates differently and so forth. And in the preface, Ken Ham admitted this is the hardest thing, the starlight problem, for young earthers to overcome. Why is the starlight so fatal to young earth?
I have not read Russell Humphreys' book. And in fact, I don't engage a whole lot with the young earth arguments yet. I'm going to be getting to that. And so I just haven't investigated it too much. So I don't actually know what they're talking about when they mean the starlight problem, unless they're talking about...
Oh, very simple. We see the Andromeda Galaxy 2 million light years away.
Oh,
so
I see. Okay,
so implies it's 2 million years old.
Yeah,
so we see supernova 1987. We saw it in 1987. Okay. It's 156,000 light years away. So you can't do the young Earth in progress sort of thing or whatever. It is a slam dunk against young Earth, because we saw it on our telescopes. You're familiar with the 1987 supernova?
Oh yeah.
So why does that prove? Explain, help. These people need help. To me, Sarah, this educational system is a total failure when you can't even understand the most simple things about the universe.
I grew up in Canada, very secular Canada. Both of my parents were public school teachers, and I didn't learn anything about the age of the universe in school at all. Yeah, so I can't just pin it on the American system. The Canadian system kind of stinks too. But
we have places like the Institute of Creation Research here in Dallas, right up the road. These people have enormous influence on propagandizing these churches, and basically it's a litmus test. When I went to the conferences, the Young Earth, Old Earth conferences, they would put Hugh Ross up and says, you guys want to know what Satan looks like? This is it.
He is the nicest, gentlest, most Christ-centered, committed Christian I know. I mean, it's absurd that they talk about him that way. It's so uncharitable.
And Sarah, he went there. He said, we're Christians. Let's go and get together. And they said, we do not want to talk to you, Satan. So, and let me tell you, Sarah, this is what led me away from the faith, is this nonsense of 6,000 years. If they lied to me about that, then they'll lie to me about anything.
That's okay. So I think we have to be careful here. And this is something that comes up over and over again. So I'm sure many of you have heard of Rabbi Zacharias, right?
Sure.
Yeah. And just this horrible, just awful discovery that was made after he died. And so the discussion came up that there were he led several people
Yes.
to Christ, to become Christians. And there were people in the wake of all of these accusations and these investigations about him and his abominable behavior, saying, well, I can't believe Christianity now. I don't think I'm a Christian anymore because of that. And it's like, now, wait a minute. You didn't come to Rabbi, you came to Christ. And just because you have like a broken windmill that's pointing in the right direction, and you find out that it's a broken windmill, or a weather vane or whatever you want to call it, it doesn't mean that you're not going in the right direction. It means that you had something broken pointing you in the right direction. There's many more people, in the church that think the universe is very old, or they're saying, I don't understand it, and it's a tertiary issue. I'm going to focus on what's more important to me, which is, all of this stuff in the New Testament. So I think I can understand if people have reasons that they reject Christianity, but I don't think it's a good idea to reject Christianity on the basis of Christians, because it's an incredibly varied body of believers. And you have people in here who are everywhere from sincere to wolves in sheep's clothing. You have people who call themselves believers, but they're more interested in the politicking part of it. I just think I would never become Christian or leave Christianity because of people. For me, it all points to Jesus Christ. That's why I'm a Christian, not because of Hugh Ross or Ken Ham or people like that. I just think you got to be careful with that.
I got a question along those lines for you, Sarah. The last part of your chapter was kind of taking the information about the black hole and how the resistance to embracing the concept and how counterintuitive it was, and then you kind of shift gears and talk about that as a kind of a analogy for your own spiritual journey. Can you help us understand how those same barriers, those human conditions of the limited perspective and the misleading emotions, the intellectual inertia, and the excessive pride, how those same four things not only prevent brilliant physicists and astronomers from being able to accept the truth of black holes, but how does that affect all of us as human beings? Those same four criteria of being able to entertain, spiritual truths.
Okay, so could I use the young Earth thing as an example? Would that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay, so in some of my interactions, so years ago I gave a talk at a big church, and I went through my whole argument for why I think the universe is billions of years old, and then I make the argument for why this isn't a problem in terms of Genesis. And I had a couple that was sitting up in the front. They came up to me later and they said, you know what? You converted us. We were young earthers and now we're not. And, I was a little astounded, and I thought it was kind of neat. And in fact, the husband of the couple went on to become a pastor of apologetics at a church here. And I think he's either getting his PhD or he just got it. So it just fired him up. He just went full force in that. And so you have, kind of broadly speaking, two different groups within young Earth that I've encountered. You've got people like these folks who they just believe the 6,000 year thing because that's what they were taught. That's the only evidence they had been presented with. They thought that they had to believe that in order to be faithful to Scripture, but they were open to other evidence. They were open to being reasoned with. They weren't, completely dogmatic about that. They were just waiting to hear something compelling. And boy, they went with it. Now you've got other people like Ken Ham. I'm not a fan. I think this guy, I've seen him get in a few debates and discussions with people. And first of all, I don't think he's a real honest person. And I think you get people like that who are very dogmatic. And I think it has to do with a lot of pride. And for some of these people, and I'm not going to say, any names here, but I know for a fact, some of them, it's about money. They make a lot of money doing that kind of thing, and where you have anything worldly invested into a point of view, whether it's your pride, your emotions, some kind of tangible benefit like money or prestige or something, you do get people who you're never going to change their mind because they are so invested in terms of these limitations into that point of view that you're never going to knock them out of that. And so you have to be kind of careful to discern between those two people. And my hope is that most of those 40% that Bill was talking about are people that are just sincere and they don't know because nobody's really explained to them the evidence and how you can reconcile this with scripture. And I would think that a majority of those people can be pulled over to the other side. But a few of them won't be because they're so invested. And, and I think about that in terms of like Jeffrey Burbidge, who was a great, great astrophysicist. So he and his wife and I think it was Fred Hoyle, who I'm sure some of you have heard of. He's the guy who coined the term Big Bang. So the three of them came up with the idea of stellar nucleosynthesis. And this is the idea that you get stars manufacturing the heavy elements, that are necessary for life. And so they were the ones who figured that out. Brilliant guy, made huge contributions to astrophysics, but he was an absolute raging atheist. He hated the Big Bang Theory. He was a big proponent of the steady state eternal model of the universe. And when all this evidence came pouring in for a universe with a beginning, for the Big Bang, he just resisted. And, I met this guy. I worked alongside him at UC San Diego. And he just, for ideological reasons, was never, and as far as I know, went to his grave, never giving up on the steady state model. He just was not going to capitulate on that. And to me, that was kind of sad. It didn't change my opinion about him as an astrophysicist. He did wonderful things, but my gosh, here's a guy that just no amount of evidence is going to change his mind because he doesn't want his mind changed. And we see that on both sides.
Can you take us through that conversion? You said mid 2005, somewhere along in there. The parallels of overcoming that intellectual inertia and maybe pride, the other things that paralleled what the physicists, scientists have had to overcome in embracing the possibility of stars imploding on themselves and becoming black holes. Could you parallel that and take us through that spiritual journey of how you overcame those same four things in your life to be able to accept the possibility that there really is a God?
Okay, so I think it was 2006 is when I finally converted, but it was a process that had started 7 years before that. And at UC San Diego, when I was there as a researcher, and so for me, it was just, I called myself the failed atheist experiment, because you get people saying like, well, if everybody was raised atheist, we wouldn't have religion. You're only religious because your parents were. But I was raised atheist, like from my very first moments. I never read a word of scripture. I honestly did not know who Jesus was. I knew he was a baby on Christmas. That's all I knew about Jesus. I didn't know anything about the cross. I didn't know about that he was the Son of God, any of this stuff. I knew as little about religion as it is possible to know in the 20th century in the Western world. Okay, never read a word of scripture, never set foot in a church, nothing. Grew up in a secular country. And so for me, I came to realize later that that was the only reason that I was an atheist, because as soon as I was presented with evidence otherwise, I found it very reasonable. So for me, there wasn't a whole lot to overcome except maybe the emotional aspect. So I found that once I was presented with evidence that it was no difficulty for me to believe in God at all. And so for me, it was kind of the teleological argument. When I was at San Diego and I was working on this incredible cosmology project, we were looking at deuterium abundances in the early universe, which is a tricky thing to do, but it turns out that you can do it, which is amazing to me, that we can probe very early back into the history of the universe and to test a model that we have about the universe, the Big Bang. And all of these pieces kind of had to fall into place in order for us to be able to do that. And I'm looking at this incredible order of the universe and how structured it is. And I remember I just stopped as I was walking across the campus one day, and I just said, the best explanation for this is God. And I realized at that moment that I was a theist. What took me a long time, and the reason it was 7 years between that realization and to when I became a Christian, is because I did have that emotional thing where I really just hated Christianity, because somehow, either through my parents or through this kind of the culture that I absorbed, I had just come to think that Christianity made people kind of weak and kind of foolish, and like you had to turn your brain off. And my whole life was about intellect and science. And it's like, why would I do that? Why, I want to be able to explore the universe in my mind. I want to be able to think whatever I want to think. And I thought it was like some zombie colon control thing. And so it took me a long time, even after I started to read the Bible and start to read the New Testament and really study it, and to look at it in a scholarly way, and to look for the supporting evidence and the historicity of Jesus and all of that. And even right up until those last moments, that emotional thing from my whole previous life was so hard to overcome, to say, yes, I want to become a Christian because I believe all of this stuff and I want all of it. But man, that emotional component was really hard to overcome in the end. But I think this is kind of where my intellect saved me, because what do you do when intellectually you've studied something long enough, like black hole physics, for instance, and you've got the philosophical arguments, or in the case of black holes, you've got the mathematical arguments, and then the evidence starts to pile in. And as far as you can tell, it is correct. And you say, okay, well, intellectually, I accept that this is true. Now, what do I want to do with it? Do I want to ignore it and just go about my life how I went about it before? Do I want to completely reject it and say, yeah, I think it's true, but I hate it? Or do I say it's true and I believe it and I want to be in on it? And that's what I chose. But it was a really tough decision. And the funny thing is, the thing that kind of got me over the finish line there was my brother. So my brother's 11 months younger than me. We grew up practically like twins. We're very, very close. He's an aerospace engineer. He's an actual legit rocket scientist. He's designed guidance systems for lunar landers and things. He just does incredible work. And so he was even more of an atheist and a skeptic than I was, like hardcore. And so as a graduate student, he and I, we were both in graduate school at the same time. He was up at University of Washington. I'm here at UT. And graduate life, I have to tell you, is very tedious. It's a lot of work that's just grinding, and you're at your computer all day. And so we would have this little chat app open on our computers while we're working, and we would just kind of chat with each other all day, like, hey, how's it going? What you working on? Every day we would talk like that. And I'm realizing at some point I'm going to have to tell my brother that I'm thinking about becoming Christian, and I'm just dreading what kind of response I'm going to get. Like, he's going to say, well, you loser, why are you doing that? And then is he going to reject me? Is he going to think I'm an idiot? And so finally I just tell him, Ben, I'm thinking about becoming a Christian. And he responded with probably the last thing that I would ever expect him to say, which was, well, what's there to think about? You just do it. I did. And honestly, I was flabbergasted. My brother had just become a Christian, unbeknownst to me. So there was a student in his lab who invited him to a men's Bible study group. And he just really thought he liked the message. He started going and just realized that he believed it and this is what he wanted. And it's not that it changed my mind about anything intellectually, it's that it gave me the courage to push past my emotional barrier that I had to this, to say it's okay to do this. And that was just kind of like the last little thing I needed to push me over, and then I converted.
James,
go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish up. Follow up.
No, I was just going to say a minor technical question that I had that should hopefully easy answer. I think it was last year or the year before, the media published images of, say they finally have a picture of a black hole. And here you can see it right there. But I was kind of wondering, this is kind of related to Ken's question earlier. If light can't escape, is this some kind of X-ray or gamma ray? What are we actually seeing in the photograph if it's not light?
Great
you know the
question.
photo I'm talking about?
Yeah, the donut.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a great question. It's a question I get all the time, and it's a reasonable question. So the reason you can see it, and I talk about this in the book, it's like black holes are invisible, and this is a reason for a long time that people didn't take the idea of black holes very seriously in science, because how the heck are you going to see it? It's minuscule for one thing. It's black. Space is black. Forget it. How are you ever going to see this? And what started to give them hope is when they actually found evidence for a neutron star, and like such strong evidence that this cannot be anything other than a neutron star, which they never thought they would see. And so they started to think, well, if we can see a neutron star, now keep in mind, this is something that is the size of a city. Like it's a few kilometers across in deep space. And how the heck are you going to see something that small? Well, you can see it because it shines very brightly in one spot. When you have, and I'm leading up to the answer to your question here. So you've got this spherical thing, this neutron star that's, the radius is about the size of like the city of Austin or something, but it's like a giant bar magnet in space. It's highly magnetically charged. And so you've got, so you can imagine, the magnetic field lines around, through this thing. It's like a big bar magnet. Because it's got a skin of charged particles on it. And when you've got a moving charge, you've got a magnetic field. And so then you've also got, and because of that, and you've got particles being accelerated along these magnetic field lines, you've got shiny spots on a neutron star. So I want you to imagine that you've got a neutron star whose axis of rotation is tilted a bit, and then maybe to the point where one of the poles of its magnetic field is pointed right at Earth, kind of like this maybe. So you can kind of see it, and it's spinning like this. And every time that pole sweeps past the Earth, you get a flash, like you get a signal, right? It's a flash, flash, flash. It's like a lighthouse. And so they have these things called millisecond pulsars, because they actually spin like 1,000 times a second. It's incredible. Hundreds and thousands of times a second. That's how fast these things are spinning. And they're extremely precise, more precise than an atomic clock. And so people are looking at this and thinking, what the heck is this? And at first they thought it was, they called it little green men, because they thought it was evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. And what they came to realize, no, actually it's a neutron star called a pulsar, because it pulses like that. And with the evidence they had, they knew it couldn't be anything other than a neutron star. So what they had found out is that there were ways to look for things that they had not anticipated. So it kind of opened their minds to the possibility that maybe there's a way to detect black holes, which we think are invisible, in a way that, we didn't anticipate. And so, yes, that's in fact what happened, which is that you've got, maybe you can't see black holes directly, but you can see what's going on around them. And the best explanation for what you're seeing going on around black holes is that they are black holes. So for instance, believe
Sarah,
it or not, there are black hole skeptics out there. There are people who think that it's.
We have that clip
Sorry?
from your presentation where the Cygnus X1 juggling tennis balls.
Oh man, it's just, yeah. So there's that. There's Cygnus X1, which is like a star-massed black hole. But then you've also got things like supermassive black holes. So you can see stuff. So what they found is they found a Cygnus X1, meaning that it's an X-ray source in the constellation Cygnus. And what you're seeing is that there's a star and then there's a companion. You can see the star and it's got some kind of companion that's invisible that is emitting X-rays. And so what it turns out to be is that you've got these two stars that were kind of born together. They were, most stars in the galaxy are actually multi-star systems, like 2, 3, 4 stars together, gravitationally bound to each other. So these two were orbiting each other. One of these stars evolved quickly, more quickly than the other one, went supernova, became a black hole, and then because you kind of get this like gravitational deterioration that they start orbiting closer and closer to each other, close enough that the black hole started pulling the atmosphere off of its companion star. Okay, and so you got kind of like, you can find nifty pictures of this, artist renditions online, where it's pulling, the atmosphere off the star and it's swirling down onto it. So you don't just get material just slamming onto a black hole. It'll go down because the black hole is rotating, and it will follow the black hole as it's rotating, and it looks like water going down a drain. And it forms what's called an accretion disk as it's spinning down onto the black hole. That's what you're seeing. That's what that golden donut is in that image. So that's the same thing as Cygnus X1, only on a much larger scale. Cygnus X1 is a former star. What you're seeing with, for instance, M87 was the first black hole image that we saw. It's a huge galaxy, and it has an absolutely whopping massive black hole that's like, I think like 3 billion times the mass of the sun. And because of that size, we can actually resolve it with an Earth-sized telescope, which is what the Event Horizon Telescope is. And so what you're seeing is material that somehow is coming from, like, it's gas that kind of gets disturbed in the galaxy and then just kind of falls down to the center, and then it spirals down before it goes into the black hole. But because you've got such extreme gravity close to the event horizon of the black hole, that material gets sped up super fast, like almost to the speed of light. And because you've got such a high gravitational differential, what that means is, like, there's a difference in gravity between the surface of the Earth and if you were to say go up like where jet airliners fly, like 30,000 feet, right? There's a measurable difference in the amount of gravity that you have. You experience more gravity closer to the Earth, less gravity away from it. That differential close to a black hole, though, is incredible. Like you get such a huge difference between the gravity, say at this point close to the black hole and this point. And so what that means is that material very close to the black hole is going to be moving a lot faster than material that's just maybe one layer further away. And so you get a lot of friction because you've got that, as it goes further and further in, it goes faster and faster. You've got these layers that are rubbing up against each other. All that dynamic friction, it makes the event horizon, and I see we've got Michael here, I think you've got an image that looks that's pretty much that image. That's great. So you're seeing that accretion disk. That's material that's on its way into the black hole, but before it goes in, it's spiraling really fast. There's a lot of friction. It's glowing super hot, like a stove element that's glowing red hot. Well, this is glowing so hot, it's in the X-rays, and then down it goes into the black hole. So fortunately, what we're seeing is the last gasp of that stuff before it goes down. Can't see a black hole directly, but we see black holes. We infer they exist based on the behavior of stuff right around it.
Hey,
So
Sarah,
that's what you're seeing.
Sarah, that's incredible, what you've just said. And I know black holes led you to faith. There's 100 billion galaxies. Each galaxy has 200 billion stars. They say it's as many suns as there are grains of sand in all of each. So it's just an amazing, mind-boggling universe we have. Does the size of the universe lead you to faith?
Does it? It's not really a deterministic factor either way. I just kind of marvel at the size of the universe and just think, it's incredible. It's grand. but it doesn't really impact my faith one way or the other.
Okay.
James, I have the and Sarah, and you can explain this. I remember when you did your conference in Houston a couple of years ago, your video didn't work. They had to freeze all your frames, but I actually have the 20-year footage of the black hole at the center of our galaxy. I'll play it.
That is the neatest thing.
Oh yeah, and I think this is the most, for me, when we were talking about the book and when we put this together, you relating black holes to God. This was it for me. This was wonderful. It's like a minute and a half, I think, but it's you explaining this 2 years ago down in Houston. And is that okay to play, James, if you want to do that? Okay. So I'm going to share I'm going to share my screen, everybody. So pardon me for just a second.
Okay, because this is the neatest thing. What you're looking at here is just the very, very, very inner part. Yeah, there we go. This is time lapse. So these are images that were taken of the very center of our galaxy, showing individual stars. And I think this was taken over the course of, I don't know, like 10, 15 years, something like that, maybe longer.
14.
But you can see all of these stars, especially that bright one at the center there, whipping around some invisible point in space, right? Look at them do that. I mean, it's incredible. And when I talk to people who, believe it or not, there are people out there who really think that black holes are just made up. And I show them this and I say, well, what's your explanation for that? We're able to resolve individual stars there. So obviously we don't have a problem seeing tiny things there. And we're seeing something, these stars are obviously orbiting something that's incredibly small, that's invisible, and based on just Newtonian gravity, you can just figure out what the mass is of the thing. Just judging by, you can measure what the orbital radiuses are, the radii of those stars, whipping around there. You can figure out how far away from this center thing they are. You can figure out how fast they're moving, and just based on Newtonian physics, you can infer what the mass is there. And this thing is millions of times the mass of the sun. And so I tell them, it's small, it's invisible, it's incredibly massive. What else would you call that but a black hole? And that to me is just an absolute slam dunk.
Yeah.
Evidence for black holes, for these supermassive black holes. It's just so exciting.
Ron, you've had your hand up, your virtual hand up. You want to ask Sarah a question? Unmute.
Yeah, first of all, Sarah, thank you for your clarity. This is delightful. I appreciate your ability to explain things for us mere mortals. One thing that, it's easy for us, again, as mere mortals to make a straw man of the story that Einstein resisted the idea of a beginning. That's just a little cartoonish of us, I think, to do that. But my question when I think about that is, surely some of the world's brightest scientists more than 100 years ago had to grasp the idea that you couldn't have an infinite regression. And if you can't have an infinite regression, how could they not have questioned a stable universe?
So, can you ask that? I'm not sure exactly what the question is.
The question is whether there were any of our brilliant scientists before about 100 years ago who questioned the idea that the universe was stable.
I honestly don't know. That's a good question. That's something I would like to know. Because I wondered, like in Newton's time, like Newton, the greatest scientist who ever lived. I don't even know what his view on that was, and how, for instance, philosophically, and many of these scientists were Christian, like how they reconciled that with scripture. I don't know. I know that Thomas Aquinas, because back at the time of Aquinas, you had this movement called scholasticism, and it was when they rediscovered the philosophy of Aristotle, and they were just like so in love with Aristotle and the philosophy. It's like, okay, we got to figure out how to fit this in with, with our Christian theology. And so they were able to kind of reconcile a lot of it, but not all of it. And one of the components of Aristotelian philosophy is an eternal sort of steady state universe. And so Aquinas was like, okay, well, how do we reconcile that with God creating the universe? And so he came up with it was a clever idea. So like you said, imagine that you have a foot standing on sand and making a footprint, and that foot has eternally been in that sand, and that sand has eternally been there. And the foot is the cause of that footprint, even though they're both eternal and standing in there. It's like, okay, it's kind of clever, but ultimately it's not very satisfying. I think for a lot of them, it was just kind of a secondary or a tertiary issue. I think they were either they just backburnered it because they didn't know and they couldn't figure it out, or just fundamentally it wasn't that important of a question to them at that time. So the short answer, I don't know.
So again, just short version of the question. Surely there were some secular scientists who would have logically concluded that an infinite regress is logically impossible.
And there may well have been philosophers and scientists talking about that back then. I'm just not aware of it.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, though.
Sometimes philosophers and scientists don't talk a lot to each other. Yeah, I want to take just a moment before we get, I know there's some others questions, but I just want to take just a moment to talk about what we've got coming up in the next couple of months on the book club, and you guys might want to start reading on some of that. Let me see if I can, let's see, get that going.
Sarah, I know I've asked you this question before, but it was kind of funny. Oh, well, did you find it, James? I'll stop.
Yeah, I think I've got it here.
Okay.
First of all, we do have, in fact, we just got it up, the last month's book club, July, with Dale Allison. Bill talked a little bit about that earlier. So if you want to watch the about 2-hour video, you can go to atheistchristianbookclub.com, and you can watch last month's if you weren't able to participate at the time. Also, we are skipping September. We're going to take a break from September from the book club, and then we're coming back in October. So on October 6th, our guest, again, on the subject of space and cosmology, we're going to have Dr. Leslie Wickman. She's going to be talking about her book, God of the Big Bang. And I know Daniel has interviewed her for one of our podcasts. Can you share a little bit more about?
Oh, I'm sorry, James. Go ahead. I'm on a delay.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I will be interviewing Leslie this month and next week, actually. So it will be a podcast up on Good Heavens. And Good Heavens is on Patreon and Podbean and on Apple Podcasts and on our Facebook, on our Watchman page. But you can listen to the interview. If you can't get the book for whatever reason, you can listen to the conversation that we'll have with Leslie in plenty of time for our October meeting. So that's what we'll offer. And there are plenty of videos of Leslie out there. I think she even did a TED Talk at some point, but plenty of stuff to supplement the book.
Yeah, what we always try to do is, of course, recommend the book. Anything in the book is fair game, but then we usually have a focus chapter or two that we really want to zoom in on the book club. So if you don't have time to read the whole book, and then we always try to supplement with video, as we did with Dr. Salviander, that you can watch the video and get a general idea of what that chapter or what that section of the book is about. And we will do the same on this one. And this, then in November, this is not, we haven't locked the date in for sure. He definitely wants to be back with us. Seth Drews, atheist commentator, author. He was with us. I think the book he did a couple of years ago with us was The Confessions of a Former Fox News Atheist. And his newer book, Christianity Made Me Talk Like an Idiot. So now, in the introduction, he makes it very clear that when he was a Christian, he wasn't an idiot, even though he talked like one. And he's not saying that all Christians are idiots. But he's going to talk about language, and well, we'll just find out when we read the book and talk with him. But that's going to be November 3rd. And again, if you watch on our Facebook page or atheistchristianbookclub.com, we will have more information as that comes up, and as soon as we get a definite confirmation from Seth that he is available for that date. We may have to move the date, but I think that will probably work. So you see what we have here. cut that off. And so, do we have anybody else queued up for a question for Dr. Salviander?
I don't see any questions right now. Does anybody else have a question that they'd like to ask?
I just wanted to make an observation. I found it fascinating to listen to your story, Dr. Salviander, because I think mine was almost a mirror image of yours, because I grew up in a very evangelical environment and I never heard any substantive arguments against Christianity or my version of it, just evangelical Christianity. Growing up, it wasn't until I was well into my adulthood that I was even exposed to anything serious, any serious arguments against Christianity. And it was like the rug was taken out from under me. It's like I suddenly realized that, well, maybe I've been, kept in the dark for so long, and now suddenly there's this whole vista of new things for me to discover. And so I think, in a sense, your experience mirrors a little bit of mine, in that you were kept out of the knowledge of the things that, there's serious people that were arguing in favor of Christianity. I thought there were no serious people arguing against Christianity, right? So I was the total opposite. And so I found, there are serious people that really believe, don't believe in Christianity. It's like, how could that be, type of thing. So I'm just waiting to say I resonate with your story in that sense. And interestingly, I've been told by some Christians that, and they may have a point. They say, well, Ken, if you had just been exposed to some of these arguments early on, then you would have been more inoculated. You'd be better ready to address those issues, and you wouldn't have been caught flat-footed, so to speak. So, I guess, I don't know if that's a critique of me. Maybe I should have been more ambitious in seeking out arguments against my faith early on. I don't know how many Christians actually do that when they're growing up, but it seemed like a critique against me. If only I had been more vigilant, I could have avoided the fate that I eventually found myself in.
Well, I appreciate that, Ken. And, growing up the way I did it, because, and probably for you, you're saturated in that environment. You just don't consider that there's really any other way to look at the world, except, to me, Christians were kind of like these weirdo aliens that kind of just existed in small numbers here and there. And, so I didn't think about it seriously, but so like you said, when you didn't encounter anybody serious who disagreed with Christianity, and I hadn't met anyone serious who was Christian. One of the things that kind of rocked my world was when I went to college, and I found out that two of my physics professors, whom I respected, were Christian, and not just like a little bit Christian, but like really Christian. They had lots of kids, they homeschooled, really active in their churches, and I just like, this is weird, and it was the first time I encountered serious intellectual people who were believers, and it didn't convert me on the spot, but it kind of shook my worldview.
Yeah, and that's why I appreciate a venue like this, that, if we're going to have any hope of, getting out of our own straitjackets, we have to be exposed to other people's views that differ from ours.
Yeah, for sure.
And, I appreciate listening to like the Unbelievable podcast out of England, where they have people come together. They bring in, very able advocates of both sides that go at it. It's like, and for me, it's eye-opening that, there's really, now I'm back in kind of in the other side where I'm seeing, there really are serious Christians who really know their stuff. And it's like, okay, well, now it's bringing me back in the sense to realize that it's more of a balance, see it more in a balanced way, that it's not just, each one has a monopoly on serious arguments for their position,
right,
or serious advocates of that position.
And I do find that there are reasonable atheists out there and who present interesting arguments, and you can really have substantive discussions with them, and you need that kind of pushback, and you need those different perspectives to kind of just to sharpen your own philosophy. So I appreciate that.
That's certainly what a lot of us enjoy about the book club. It gets us out of that echo chamber and gets us in a place where we can hear. I often say I've had the dubious privilege of being able to hear some of the best arguments against Christianity over the last 4 years. I'm still a Christian, but I think I benefit from giving careful attention and trying to understand those arguments. And hopefully the book club makes me a better thinker. That's certainly one of the goals of, I think, a lot of us here in the book club.
Yeah. And Sarah, I know, can you believe it's been 3 years since Story of the Cosmos came out?
I cannot.
I know, it's ridiculous. I just want to thank you. I know we've talked quite a bit behind the scenes about things. And so I just want to thank you personally for jumping in this month. I know you had other things on your plate. So thank you for coming and being so kind and gracious to entertain us with your wisdom. And I thought maybe we could wrap up and you could, it was funny for me. I don't know. I know we've talked about it a million times, but when I first approached you on Twitter, I found out about you on Twitter and I had asked you to be, did she just disappear? Oh no, there you are. I had asked you if you wanted to be in a book. You didn't know me from Adam. I mean, how that must have been kind of weird. And I can't believe you said yes.
Well, it was such a neat concept. And, and honestly, because you were pulling in these other really well-known people and like my personal philosophical hero, Bill Craig, and you said you were going to pull him in, and my gosh, you had the Pope's astronomer and then Luke Barnes, who I think so highly of all these people. And like, why not? Why not?
Yeah, to me, it was miraculous. I can't believe, I'm like, how am I facilitating all this? It was really a great book to put together and a lot of fun. So, but thanks so much, Sarah, for coming on tonight and sharing with us the wonderful stuff about black holes and God. I think it's great.
My pleasure.
Well, we're wrapping up here, guys, and we're almost out of time. But since we've got you here, Sarah, and you're on the spot, and we're recording this, so we're gonna put you on the spot with this. You are working on another book, which you have a publication date. You have a deadline.
So we have set a tentative date to give it to the editor, which is October 13th, and everybody always asks me why that date. And it was because it was exactly a few number of months from when we had the discussion. Okay, when are we going to submit this thing? And also, it's the birthday of a dear friend of mine who passed away about 5 years ago, and so it's just kind of a way to honor him. So from there, I don't know how long it's going to take the editor to do his thing and get that through. And then because we're actually self-publishing. I talked to some people, at major publishers and just decided I think it's the best thing for us to self-publish. But I am getting an outside editor to do this because you really need an objective person to look at this. And then I have to commission a cover artist. And then as soon as we can get it up onto Amazon, then that's what we're going to do. We're aiming for January, February-ish to have that out.
So can we have a straight commitment from you that you will be willing to come back on the book club when the new book comes out? And you've got me very curious about this now.
Absolutely. Happy to.
Okay, great. Well, we got that down. And again, I want to join with the rest of the club, thanking you for your willingness to come and give of your time for our book club. And I do want to feedback there. Okay, thanks. And I did want to also it's something weird, but anyway, I did want to
photons, those darn photons.
Before I get sucked into the event horizon, I did want to see if you had any kind of words of wisdom for the club, for both the atheists and the Christians. Any advice, anything you'd like to share?
Just like general kind of advice.
Yeah.
Eat your vegetables, that kind of thing. Well, listen. Just go where the evidence takes you. Just be willing to go where the evidence takes you, even if it's a place that makes you uncomfortable. And that's for everybody.
And that is true. I think our talk earlier when we were talking about, Bill brought up Romans chapter 1 and this idea that humans tend to suppress God's truth in our unrighteousness. As someone else pointed out, I don't think this is an atheist problem. I think it's part of the human condition. And, I believe in God, but I still believe also that I routinely try to suppress God's truth in my unrighteousness. It's a fault that I try to overcome, but it's part of the human condition of sin that it's going to be. In this life, we'll never be able to overcome it completely. But yeah, this is the gist of your book, talking about how difficult it is for us to wrestle with ideas, all of us, because of cognitive biases and other issues, that we cannot think outside of the box that we're currently in. And thanks for bringing that to our attention. The great illustrations on the black holes and how that comes alive. And thank you so much for being part of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. Thank you, Sarah.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And so we will see you guys not in September, but in October for our next book club. And until then, have a good rest of your summer. Thank you.
The Atheist and Christian Book Club is a production of Watchman Fellowship Incorporated, Arlington, Texas. For more information about our ministry, visit watchman.org.